All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brooke Schaefer. I am the middle school counselor here at Creative Minds. Apologies if you can hear my cat in the background. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm discussing a year of pandemic reflections and resilience. We're really excited to be able to kind of, reflect on what we've been through this past year. I'm going to turn it over to our facilitator, Miss Julie, who is our community-based therapist from Paving the Way. Go ahead, Julie.
Hi, thank you, Miss Brooke, and thank you for that kind introduction. And I am looking forward to getting started and reviewing reflections and resilience during this trying year of pandemic. Okay, all right. So first, let's just go through acknowledging kind of the elephant in the room, right? We've all experienced collectively a potentially traumatic event this year, right? And this has impacted all of us in different ways. For just a little bit of kind of general information about trends that we've seen in adults, studies show the number of adults that have reported symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder has at least tripled, and almost 4 in 10 adults are now reporting symptoms of either anxiety or depressive disorder, up from 1 in 4 pre-pandemic. So that is just a bit of a trend, unfortunately. And while research is still in the early stages for child and adolescents and the impact of the pandemic on their mental health, child and adolescent anxiety is reportedly surging. Also, unsurprisingly, and as many of you probably know all too well, parental stress levels have risen this year. And in addition to the negative impacts on adults, this increases children's risk for experiencing family adversity. So research shows, at its worst, child maltreatment and domestic violence increases, and other mental health problems can increase too. So many Americans have turned to substance use as a way to cope this year, right? With all the stress and pain that the pandemic has brought on. So that is just kind of an overview of some ways that Americans have been impacted by the pandemic. But what we're really here to talk about tonight is that we've all experienced this very differently, right? Those words don't encapsulate much of the real experience. And many of us are still operating in survival mode. Others are beginning to find their new normal, perhaps one of many new normals that will be to come as we continue to adjust. And no matter what your journey has been and where you are on it, what we want to focus on today is to allow you a chance to pause and reflect on what your experience has been. This is important because, right, pausing amidst chaos, pandemic or any other kind of chaos, and reflecting, it can help us untangle and sort through our experiences, consider making different possible interpretations about our experiences, and create meaning. All right. And that meaning is not, finding meaning in the pain of the experience, but in what we've learned from our struggle through the adversity of the experience. And enhanced insight and meaning making that we get from reflection can help us shift the narratives that we tell ourselves, okay? Contribute to our growth and inform our future mindsets and behaviors, okay? And seeking to create this meaning is also a factor in resilience, which is the other topic of our time tonight, okay? So now, to help us ground ourselves, let's start with a mindfulness exercise. If you want to take a moment, and if you have a piece of paper somewhere nearby, grab a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, and a pencil or a silver colored marker or crayon or colored pencil or anything silver, like a pencil or marker, okay? So I'll give you a moment to get that ready. And then
I will throw out while people are about to engage in this, for our attendees who might be watching this in the recorded session that will be emailed out. Please feel free to do this at your own time, please feel free to do this other times in the future or even with your children.
Thank you, Ms. Brooke. Thank you very much. All right. So whether now or later, or by yourself or with your kids, so take out a piece of paper and take both of your hands and put them on the piece of paper. So you have them positioned so that there's room for both on the paper, and then slowly trace each of your hands. So starting with one hand, trace, okay, till the outline of your hand is traced, and then slowly shift to the next hand, okay? And as you trace, again, this is kind of a mindful moment. So notice the feelings of the pencil on your hands. And if you don't have a pencil, right, but you still want to engage a bit, you could just trace with your finger and just go through tracing slowly and notice how the pencil or your finger feels against your hands. And take a few deep breaths with some of your exhales being longer, or all of your exhales ideally being longer than your inhales, okay? All right, I'm gonna give you a moment in case you do wanna engage in that right now. And while you are tracing, I wanna invite everyone to also take a moment to reflect on this past year, okay? What has your experience been, okay? How would you describe it? What first comes to mind? Now hone in on what are some of the challenges or losses that come to mind for you. These could be at home, in your relationships, at work, financially, in your realm of work, in balancing all of that, right? And reactions to what we've seen in the news this year, to things happening in your community. Okay. What are some of the main challenges or losses that you have experienced this year? And it's important to acknowledge some of the specifics of what has been hard for each of us about this year and not minimize the experiences of losses that seem small, may seem small, right, in comparison to death, others' COVID horror stories, the worst stories we've seen on the news. Our experiences, even if they're not as bad, our own experiences and feelings about them are really important, and feelings about, right, our challenges, losses, and uncertainties about this year need space to be felt too. These losses could be, the loss of a vision you had for yourself, or a goal or milestone that you had expected to meet or expected your child to meet and you weren't able to. Okay, important to feel these too. Now, using your non-dominant hand, if you have your tracing of your two hands, right into the outline of the non-dominant hand that you traced, okay? What have been 1 to 3 challenges or losses that you have experienced this year, okay? So again, using your non-dominant hand right into the outline of your non-dominant hand, what 1 to 3 challenges or losses have been that you've experienced this year. Okay. All right. Can I give you a moment? Okay. All right. Okay. We're going to keep going. All right. Once you have that, we're going to continue on to a quote from Amanda Gorman. Okay. She's the youngest inaugural poet in U.S. history and an award-winning writer. And she shared these words in her poem during this year's inaugural ceremony. Many of you are probably familiar. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. So now, reflecting on this, I want to invite you to consider where you have been able to find silver linings or light in the darkness this past year. What moments of joy have you experienced amidst all of the uncertainty, losses, and other challenges? What might you even miss about your current lifestyle when you move into the next phase of your lives and the next iteration of the new normal? Pause to reflect on these moments of joy And if you want, you can write them outside of the tracing of your hands, kind of like silver linings around the peripheral of your silver trace of your hands. Okay. All right. And I'll give you a moment to engage. And looking at these silver linings or bright sides, right, is proven to enhance our resilience. So this feeds into that as well. Let's take a moment. All right, and we're going to continue. You can always pause the recording if you're listening at home in between. So we're going to continue on. And it's really important, right, to recognize all of the work that you've put in this year. We just want to make sure that we reiterate that and to give yourselves credit for the resilience that it took to get this far through the pandemic, right? Parenting and supporting your kids' academics during distance learning has not been easy, and we are almost through the school year. So we just want to acknowledge that and ask all of you to give yourselves a big pat on the back, looking at those challenges you just wrote down or thought of, and also reflecting on some of the silver linings. It still has been a really hard year. So give yourself major props for getting this far through, okay? And now I want to invite you to consider what you have learned about yourself this year and what you are proud of as a person, as a parent. As you identify these insights, write them with your dominant hand inside your dominant hand sketch, okay? And to help you brainstorm and reflect, what has helped mitigate some of those challenges you faced? What strengths of yours helped you to make it through even when you wanted to give up? Which connections or supports did you find most helpful in the process? What role did your attitude play? Is there a purpose that helped you stay motivated? What other qualities of yours helped you through? Take a moment and take some time to reflect on this and write them in to the dominant hand if you did the drawing. If not, you can just write them down. Okay. And while you do that, I'll just explain a bit of the purpose. So when we use reflection, right, it can help us interrupt unhelpful narratives, right, reinterpret events, and create meaning in a healthier storyline. We can foster a sense of control and enhance our own insight and well-being for the future. So take a moment and look at your drawings. Can you create a healthier storyline for yourself? For yourself about how you experienced and navigated through the pandemic? Maybe a healthier one than the narrative you've been telling yourself. And as we move forward through this abnormal year toward whatever the next new normal looks like, what new insights will you bring with you from this past year? Did anything surprise you about your resilience as you were reflecting? Have there been any successes or lessons learned that you want to make sure that you hold on to going forward? Okay, take a moment and think about what that looks like for you or for your family. Okay, maybe you have greater appreciation for something. Maybe you realized your kid could do something right, or that they really like school after all, whatever that looks like. Okay, take a moment. I'm going to continue. And as you continue forward, self-compassion and self-care can also help to strengthen that resiliency that you're building. So I want to credit Dr. Kristen Neff, a pioneer in the field of self-compassion research. And I'm going to share a bit about utilizing self-compassion as a foundation or bridge for self-care. Okay. So Dr. Neff explains that self-compassion, what is it? It entails being warm and understanding towards ourselves when we suffer, when we fail or feel inadequate, rather than ignoring our pain or self-criticizing ourselves. Self-compassionate people recognize that being imperfect, failing, and experiencing life difficulties is inevitable. So they try to be gentle with themselves when confronted with painful experiences rather than getting angry when life falls short of set ideals. All right. So, of course, people can't always get what we want exactly. And so, when that's denied or fought against, sometimes their suffering can increase in the form of stress, right? In the form of frustration, in the form of self criticism. And when the reality is accepted, right, that things are not going exactly how we want, when that's accepted with sympathy and kindness, that can really benefit our approach to ourselves and help us come from a self-compassionate stance. Okay. Um, Dr. Neff also explains that frustration at not having things exactly as we want is often accompanied by an irrational but pervasive sense of isolation. Okay. As if I were the only person suffering or making mistakes. But all of us suffer, all humans suffer. And that's being vulnerable and imperfect is part of being human, right? So self compassion involves recognizing that suffering and inadequacy is part of the shared human experience, something we all go through, and not something that happens to one of us alone in isolation. Self compassion also requires taking a balanced approach to the negative emotions so that feelings are not completely suppressed or completely exaggerated, right? And so taking this stance can put our situation into larger perspective, and also taking a mindfulness approach allows us to have a non-judgmental receptive mind state to observe thoughts and feelings as they are without trying to suppress or deny them, right? We cannot ignore the pain, like I was saying, and feel compassion for it at the same time, right? And at the same time, we don't want to over identify with the negative thoughts. So we're so caught up, right? And swept away by our negative reactivity. So, we did a deeper dive with this last week in our teacher workshop, but I just want to encourage you right now. Next time you face a challenge and feel you're suffering, right? If you want to approach yourself with compassion, imagine talking to yourself as you would talk to a friend, right? If you wouldn't be critical or judgmental to a friend about the stress you're facing, right? Or suffering you're experiencing, try to talk to yourself in the same way, okay? And just pretty quickly, okay? You could practice saying, if you want a new self compassion practice, you're just going to go through it briefly. You could say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering or stress, right? Acknowledging that. You could say to yourself, suffering or stress is a part of life, recognizing your common humanity with others and lack of isolation. And then you could put your hands over your heart or wherever feels comfortable and soothing, and say, may I be kind to myself, or something else to express self kindness. Okay. And feel the warmth of your hands as you do it. Okay. That is one self compassion practice. There are many dimensions of self care. We're not going to do a deep dive today, especially since I think folks are a bit more familiar with self care than self compassion. Um, but if you want to pick one main dimension you want to focus in on of those listed here, consider what some small things you can do to help care for yourself as you move forward. Okay. Okay. All right. Of course, self compassion and self care is also important to equip you with the ability to model self compassion for your children and provide your children with the best care possible. Okay. So, with that, let's continue into some reflections. Okay. While this workshop is mostly geared as a support for parents this year, let's take a moment to consider that just like all of us, right? Each child has experienced the pandemic differently. Um, so, based on your observations, how has the pandemic impacted your child? What changes or losses has your child struggled to adjust to? Okay. So, a little bit of a sidebar. I just want to note that when we talk about experiencing trauma of the pandemic, The event itself, right, doesn't define whether or not something is traumatic, and trauma is about each person's reaction to the upsetting event. So, the stress that children have been experiencing over the past few months might have other consequences that don't really meet a clinical definition of trauma, but it's where the idea of adjustment comes in. And adjusting to upsetting events can still lead to other challenges, anxiety, depression, disruptive behavior. So while coronavirus might not exactly be traumatic for all kids, it can still lead to adjustment challenges. And there's chronic loss happening right now, much of which is related, right, to kids' developmental milestones. So it's not surprising that kids are having some challenges adjusting, okay? So back to our theme of reflecting. How can you support your child in reflecting on this experience that they're facing, adjusting to all of these changes in their lives? Okay. All right. When you're engaging with your family, here's a few questions that could help promote discovery of meaning and purpose in the pandemic experience. Okay. You could ask, what has the pandemic taught you? How do you think you've changed this year? What was the worst thing about this year or the best thing about this year? What did you learn this year that you had not expected? Kind of similarly to how we practiced earlier. How do you think the future will be different because of the pandemic? Are there good things, bad things? Did you create anything this year? Was there a time you helped someone this year? Who were you closest with this year? When did you laugh the hardest this year? And what will you remember most about this year? Okay, so just a few questions to encourage reflection, and pick just a few that seem best for you. Okay, all right, let's keep going. Supporting children's resilience. So many parents ask, what can we do to help my child bounce back from all the stress of the coronavirus, right? And of course, parents can't completely protect children from the stress of the situation, but the Child Mind Institute did provide some help tips that I found helpful to use to support children's mental health. Okay, so I'll go through them, and the article is also linked to in the slides if you want to do a deeper dive. So the first is adjusting expectations, right? It's normal to not be yourself when so much has been taken away. And a lot of kids won't just bounce back right now, right? Or bounce back entirely, right? Until the crisis has passed. So just adjusting your expectations, okay? Lowering the bar a bit. Another tip they give is empathizing, of course, with your kids' feelings. Clearly validating your child's emotions can make a big difference, even when you can't solve the problem. You might say, it seems like you're really sad about how summer's looking, or something else they're sad about. I know how much camp means to you, or I know how much your birthday means to you if they couldn't have a large party, whatever it is, right? And giving your child space to talk about what's upsetting to them, and not rushing to fix, right? Fix the emotions, giving that space. Okay. Another tip is to take a step back, right? And try and just identify a couple big milestones that are really important for your child right now. Completing tasks independently, being more respectful of siblings, anything your child needs to master while they're growing or learning, and find opportunities to practice this. Okay. And once you know what areas you're prioritizing, see if you can find small ways for your child to work on these skills. All right. So the article gives some examples about rewarding cooperative play between siblings, working up to 20 minutes of reading independently, practicing doing chores without help, right? Whatever you might identify, finding some small ways to practice building those skills. Okay. Of course, community support is really important, and research on resilience shows that communities make a difference. Communities can involve parents, siblings, other relatives, teachers, friends, peers who experience the same challenges. Community support is really key. Also, developing routine is very important, especially amidst change. And external support becomes more important as a means of restoring predictability, and establishing a sense, right, that there is a future, there's predictability, and there is a future. Um, and when things are really chaotic, it can be difficult to really conceive of that a future. And that's what makes some structure and routine really important. Okay. This has been important through this year, and it will continue to be important as kids readjust to new normal routines as well. So something to keep in mind. Um, all right. And then another tip is just not to sweat the rest, right? Keep putting one foot in front of the other, and supporting your kid in meeting developmental milestones, right? They don't have to be doing everything you might have expected before COVID. Kind of back to the first point about adjusting expectations, right? And that goes for you too, right? You can definitely adjust your expectations for yourself too. Let go of the idea that everyone needs to be at their best, and that can make it a little easier on both you and your kids. Okay. All right. Let's keep going. This is just really quickly. We're not going to get into much depth here. And it's likely still ahead for many of us. But you may be able to see some elements of growth at work, or see some of these areas some of these areas of growth emerging in you or your kids, right? So often post-traumatic growth happens naturally after we experience traumas. But awareness of the elements that can help facilitate growth can help you hone in on these. So today we really honed in on that narrative development element, right? So take a look at your sketch and see if there are any signs of post-traumatic growth, right? Personal strength that you identified, new possibilities, improved relationships, greater appreciation for life, spiritual growth. See if any of those were in your silver linings, or in the lessons you learned about yourself. Okay. And if not, just take a moment to reflect. Okay. All right. So again, let's keep going. All right. So we have talked during the webinar, right, about self-compassion, self-care, supporting your children and caring for them, but it really takes a village, right? Just beyond caring for yourselves and your children. It's normal that parents and children, all of us, could benefit from behavioral health and other supports now as we continue to adjust to this prolonged and ever-changing abnormal stressful time. And learning to seek and accept help is a strength that builds resilience, and is not a weakness as we often see it to be. Okay. Through a relatively new partnership this past year with the agency I work for, Paving the Way, MSI Behavioral Health Clinic, as part of DC Department of Behavioral Health school-based expansion program, students can now be connected to me or a different Paving the Way clinician for trauma-informed therapeutic services, and other students may be best served by CMI school counselor or social worker, or a different external provider. So note the service for therapy is only available to those who don't already receive counseling on an IEP or a 504. But we just want to make you aware that this new resource is available this year. And you can see on the screen if you think your child may benefit from receiving therapeutic or counseling services, the link to the therapy referral form and the therapy referral guide is in the slides. All right. And once you submit the form, just to know what to expect, school counselor Tara LaCroix will reach out to hold a consultation to determine the best fit of service for your child, and then the appropriate intake process will begin. And you can contact the email address on the screen or any of the school counselors or social workers at CMI if you have any questions. Okay. All right. So finally, if your child is in a crisis, of course, please call 911 or call CHAMPS, the Child and Adolescent Mobile Psychiatric Service. And the number is on the screen. And if you are in crisis, of course, again, please call 911 or DC's Access Helpline for adults. And that number is also on the screen. And that helpline can also help you or your child connect to other behavioral health or case management supports. Okay, please also see the numbers on the screen for the National Crisis Text line that you can text home to the number provided there, 741-741, okay, if in crisis, and also the National Suicide Prevention Hotline that you can call if experiencing suicidal ideation, okay, or having that concern for someone else. All right, let's wrap up with that. Thank you everyone for joining today. If you have any questions, feel free to send them to Brooke or myself, and our emails are up on the screen, and we look forward to connecting.
On behalf of all of us at Creative Minds, thank you, Ms. Julie, for all of your help this year and for all of your help this evening. Families, I'm really hopeful that we were able to provide you with some support or space for reflection moving forward. Again, please reach out to us at either of the emails if you have any questions. Also, as always, feel free to reach out to your student's teacher or their the middle school or lower school director. And have a great evening.